to edit, if you want to edit your metadata and add some new objects to your collection. Sometimes we get the question of how to do that. I know many of you have done that already, but just in case you're confused, I just thought I'd walk through it really quickly so that y'all can see a quick demonstration of that. So in the chat, we also have documentation on it too. So I put a link to that so you can refer to it in the future. And then I'm going to share my screen. So if you're working on your computer in Visual Studio Code, your metadata probably looks something like this. And if you have, like we said yesterday, if you have just some quick edits that you want to make, you can do it in your metadata here in Visual Studio Code. Sometimes I do that and make like a few quick edits and continue working on my my collection, and then maybe a few days later realize that I need to actually add a whole new row to my collection or make some more major edits. And at that point, I need to somehow get this CSV back into Google Sheets and edit it there, and then export it and put it back into Visual Studio Code. So the way that I do that, and there's many different ways to do this, so I'll just walk you through the way I do it. I look over and find my metadata CSV in my Visual Studio Code over here, and I just right click and say reveal in File Explorer. So this is going to pull up the folder of files that is the GitHub repository, DHSI demo, and specifically in the data folder. So basically it's exactly what I see over here, just in my File Explorer. And you can do this on a Mac too with reveal in Finder. And then once I have it pulled up, I can just create a new Google Sheet and go to File and Import. And I just click on the Upload button here, and then I can, if I can get both windows open, I can drag this CSV over, drop it in, close that. And I just leave it as replace spreadsheet, detect automatically for separators. And then I usually uncheck this box because sometimes it will do weird things to dates. So I just want it all to be plain text, all the information in the CSV to be plain text. So I can check import data at that point. And that will give me the spreadsheet with any new edits that I've made in Visual Studio Code. And now I can, do whatever edits I want to here. In this case, I have a photo that I want to add. So this is, I have a photo of dogs because I said my collection was about dogs in my issue, but then there weren't any dogs in the collection. So I have this one to add, and I made a metadata record already, so I can just copy and paste it over. So pretend I just, filled that all out for real. And now that that's done, I can give this a name. So you want to name it exactly what the file in your repository already is, so you can just replace it exactly. So you don't have to rename it at this point. You can rename it at any point of the process, but this is convenient for me. So I can then go and download it as a comma separated values. And while that's downloading, I can also pull up my my dogs JPEG and add it over to my objects folder. So here's my objects folder. And I'm just going to drag it over and drop it in. So now it's there. And then take my metadata and again, make sure it has the same name. So I'm going to delete that extra bit. And then just drop it in too. And it will ask me if I want to replace it, and I do. And now if I look at my collection, and refresh my browse, should be able to see dog. There they are. So then the last step is just to push this up to my my live site, and I can look over here to see my changes. I can also look in GitHub Desktop, which I don't have pulled up right now. So I'll just do this through Visual Studio Code right now, but you could do, you can make your commits like you've been practicing through GitHub Desktop too. And I'll just stage both of these changes at once and say add new item. And then click the check mark for a commit. And then I will need to, I can just go ahead and push the sync changes button, or I could come down here and type git push, but I'll just click this for now and say okay. And that's going to push my changes up to GitHub. And does anyone have questions about that?
While you have that running, do you want to show what it looks like when you add a logo just by uncommenting it in the config?
Yeah. So we also had a question about how to add your organization's logo. And there is this, so I'm in the config YAML file, which is that first one we edited to set up our site settings. And if I scroll down, if you scroll down past the collection settings to this site organization branding, you have the option to add a lot of specifications about your organization, including a logo. So I will, is it this the right one, or should I do both of them? So
you have to do all of them. You have to do all of them.
Oh, you have to do all of them.
Yeah, you have to do all of them. Sorry. The reason why you need to have all of them is because on desktop, there'll be one version, and then when it goes down onto mobile size, you have to have the second logo. And so on desktop, it'll be in a white space. On mobile, it's on sort of a dark space. And so you should generally have two different logos, depending on what your logo looks like. The organization name is going to be the title of the link and the alt text, and the link will be pointing out to your org.
Yeah, and it's probably going to take like a minute to generate here because it's a little faster. And okay, so now if I refresh, I can see this logo appeared, and also on this has appeared over here on above the nav bar. And if I click on either of those, it's going to take me to the link.
And I think in the footer too.
In the footer, yeah, over here too. So pretty simple. And if you are adding your own logo, you can include just a full link to it hosted somewhere else, or if you want to, you can just drop it into the assets folder or anywhere in this repository and just put a relative link, relative path to it.
And if your logo isn't sort of like rectangle, you might need to do a little bit of customization. And so if you ever run into that, let us know and we can try to help you with that.
Yeah.
You'll have to put a little height on it to make it work properly. Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah.
So we're going to go in. I wanted to kind of do something similar to what we did yesterday with looking at the kind of components and trying to make sure we can kind of make a difference understand the difference between the different parts of this workflow. And so I'm going to open this up. You've seen my slides now, folks?
Yeah.
Okay. So part of the confusing, part of this whole workflow is that you're switching between these different tools, and which can be, confusing about like, what am I actually using at that point, and which tool am I supposed to be using at this point? And so just to refresh, like kind of what I said yesterday, this is kind of our stack of tools that we're using, that we're putting together into this workflow to create a digital collection. And there's Git version control, and most of us aren't directly using Git on the command line. We're using Git in as it's embedded in GitHub on the web interface. And we're also, a lot of folks are using GitHub desktop, the desktop application that lets you use Git. And that's its only purpose of GitHub desktop. It's just an interface for using Git. Just keep that in mind, because a lot of times that's confusing, that you kind of edit files somewhere else and then you use GitHub desktop to use Git. And so you can't edit files with GitHub desktop. It's a client for using Git. And you can also use Git embedded in Visual Studio Code. So there's a lot of confusion there, because it's like so many different places that other people, that interfaces to being able to use Git. But try to keep that in mind, that there is a division there, that Git is a version control system. Git is the web platform that we're using for hosting our repositories and doing some project management. Ruby is that programming language that we don't need to know anything about, but is required for us to have to run Jekyll. Jekyll is our static site generator. That's the tool that's going to take our source code and build it into the static site that we actually publish on the web. And then CollectionBuilder is this project template, this folder of files that's a template for you to put your metadata and your objects into to generate that digital collection. And so those are our parts of our workflow. And so I wanted to look a little bit deeper at what exactly is in CollectionBuilder now. And so are you seeing this over the top, my file explorer right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So always keep in mind, it's just a folder of files. A repository, a Git repository, is actually a folder of files. And so what CollectionBuilder GH and the other templates are is a folder of files. And you go in there, there's going to be a lot of different parts to that folder that make up this project template and the source code that's going to generate your site. And so the template is just a whole bunch of modular components, and those are going to be knit together by Jekyll to build out your site. And so the components are made up of the basics of the web: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then Jekyll's letting us do a couple other extra things here. We can use Sass, which is a way to write CSS in an easier, more programmatic way. And Liquid, which is a templating language that's going to let us use some really basic logic inside of our HTML to be able to put our data onto the page. And so those are the parts of what CollectionBuilder template really is made out of. It's a bunch of little chunks of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then some Liquid to knit it together. And then Jekyll's going to take all those modular bits and build out complete pages from it. Inside of there, we have a lot of stuff that we didn't build. That there's some frameworks and libraries that we use because the #1 rule of code is don't write it yourself if somebody else already did it. And so there's a lot of frameworks out there that just help you build things faster in a more consistent manner. And so the main one that we interact with here with CollectionBuilder is that the kind of theme, the kind of base CSS of CollectionBuilder is using Bootstrap CSS, and that's the world's most popular framework for building responsive mobile-first websites. And so what it is a whole bunch of pre-configured styles using CSS and a bunch of components that they provide to you so that it'll make really a lot easier to get started building. I'm having a Zoom in my way problem. Okay, there we go. To start building websites. And so if you go over to Bootstrap, this is a really popular framework. It's used all over the place. It's used on, for example, GitHub. And so, oops, there we are. So you're going to start, once you kind of start recognizing Bootstrap, you're going to realize that you see it all over the place. It was originally designed by Twitter quite a long time ago, and then it got adopted by all kinds of different folks. And so what Bootstrap is going to do is one of the problems with writing HTML is that all the browsers render it slightly differently. And so the Bootstrap and other frameworks like this start with a reset. So they're going to get you a consistent look of anything that you put into your HTML is going to look the same on all the different browsers. And so it's going to give us a package of fonts. It's going to give us this basic look of all of the base HTML content. And then it's also going to give us some little components that are pre-designed by them using their CSS classes so that we can really quickly add some features into our into our code without having to like come up with all of the styles that are necessary to do that. And so you can see here in the docs, there's this whole list of components. And so you can see that, you know, like there's these alerts. You'll probably have recognized these from all over the web. You can recognize these buttons. I'm sure if you start seeing these buttons, it's almost certain that they're using Bootstrap or Bootstrap inspired CSS. And there's these little cards. And so there's a lot of these little kind of pre-configured components that make it easier so that you don't have to just go and invent all of the kind of language of your website. It's already kind of, there's a set of things already designed for you to start using out of the box. And so that's why you use Bootstrap, just to be able to much quicker get started and build some usable websites without having to write a whole bunch of CSS yourself. And so it's very popular. The other thing that we use is the Bootstrap icons to provide icons on the site, and so you can explore those too. And these are all, both of these are totally open source libraries, and so everything in our libraries is compatible with like an MIT license, so a very open source license. So libraries are little packages of JavaScript that somebody else has written that can create complex features. And that you can basically use via some simplified manner to create complicated features without having to write it yourself. And so we use that. We use quite a few libraries. The main ones are data tables. And so I'll show you that here. So data tables is actually really popular as well, and you probably recognize it if you've seen these kind of forms or these kind of tables out in the wild. Lots of people use this. And so all of this complicated table with the sorting and searching and the ability to export a CSV from your what's visible here, that's all pre-made by data tables. And then we kind of have the code to initialize it. And so it makes your life easier. It's something that you can reuse in other projects as well. Leaflet is the package that we use for making the maps. And so Leaflet is also a hugely popular, commonly used library. And so it makes working with maps a lot easier. It would be, you know, far beyond our abilities to create that on our own. Spotlight makes the galleries that you see for images. So if we get to a image here and we click on it and you see this gallery, that's from Spotlight. And then Lunar does the search. So if we do a search for dogs on a hike, that search is done via Lunar JS. And so these are all, you can find these in your assets and lib folder, so library folder. And so these are all external pieces of code that we didn't write, but are open source and reusable. And all of them are really commonly used and well supported. So that's kind of why we choose them. The next part inside of that template is going to be the content that you actually add. And we're going to talk more about that today. And so you have all these little modular components, and then you're going to be adding in your CSV, obviously, either all your configuration in YAML and in the CSVs, and then some Markdown content that we're going to learn about in just a minute. And that's all I wanted to cover there for just to get that, try to make those separations and try to look at what is in these folders of files. What is this template all about? Anyone have questions about that? Like how the template works? I mean, how the contents of the template and how you separate out those different tools versus the template itself. Is that starting to make a little bit of sense? I know it's pretty confusing when you're like switching between GitHub Desktop and your editor and GitHub, and there's all these places and things. Okay. So what we want to do is get to doing some work on Markdown, create some new interpretive content on our site, and maybe add some new pages. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to walk through kind of how I would normally start my day working. And so I go over to my folders of files, and here's my DHSI demo 2022 folder. So that's my repository, and I want to work on that repository. So I like to right click and open with VS Code. And so that's my text editor. So I have my text editor open now, and you're going to see my text editor has this Explorer, and that Explorer is just this folder open in the side here. So it's just all the stuff that you can see here is in my text editor. I like to open my terminal right away, and here's my terminal. Here's my username. Here's the location where I'm at. So I'm in that folder, and I'm collaborating with some folks, Olivia and Devin. So I better make sure I'm starting my work. I want to make sure that I'm up to date. So I'm going to do a git pull. I'm doing it on the terminal on the command line. You can also do that using the built-in tools here, or you could do it with GitHub Desktop. Make sure you do that sync and pull. I can't remember what the button is called on GitHub Desktop. I think sync or pull, or I don't know. So you've got to make sure that you're up to date. And good thing I did, because you can see the nice thing about doing git pull on the command line is it gives you a whole bunch of feedback about what happened. And so I can see that, wow, there's a new image about dogs and there's some new metadata. So I kind of know what's going on. And then I'm going to start my Jekyll since it's been so slow lately. So I'm going to do bundle exec Jekyll S and get that going. And so what we're going to do is we are going to write some content on our about page. And so in your project here, you're going to have pages folder here. And if I open that up and I take a look at the about.md, that .md stands for Markdown. And so those are your Markdown files. And each of these Markdown files that we have in here is going to become one of the pages on our site. And so we call them sort of Markdown stubs is typically what we call it. And for Jekyll to be able to transform those into pages, every one of those stubs needs to have what we call Jekyll front or YAML front matter or Jekyll front matter. So you can see on all of these MD pages, the top is 3 little minus signs. And then we have some stuff. And then we have 3 little minus signs. And so those things in between those 3 little minus signs is the front matter. And so those things are not going to be immediately displayed on the page. The Markdown actually starts underneath that. So the stuff in between those minus signs is actually YAML. And so this is just that same YAML that you were writing in config.yaml and theme.yaml. And so you're going to see it's key value pairs. So we have a key title, and then we have colon and space. That's how YAML always, you need that colon and space to say that it is a key. And then we have a value. And so every page is going to have a title. That title, I'm going to take this right here and I do a Control-Shift-C to copy it. When I'm opening up my page, I like to go into an incognito window so I don't have any cached content in there. I'll close that. You're going to see that every page has a title, and I'm going to go back to here. That's why I was doing this. So if I go over to my about page, the title is going to show up here in that tab. So it has about, and then this is the title of the site. And in these pages, it doesn't automatically show up anywhere visually on the page other than that. So all the content below there has to have the content that we want to display. But the title will show up in the meta markup, and it'll show up up here in that tab that the user is visiting. It's going to have a layout, and generally you don't need to mess around with this for the existing pages, but you'll want to know about that for future pages. And Devin's going to talk about layouts in the next section of the class in a minute, or in a while. It's going to have this permalink value. So the permalink is where this page is actually going to live in the final website. And so you can see that it says /about. So if we look over at our website, we have this local host, and then we have /about. So that's the location of the page. So the home page is always /index.html. And you could actually change this if you wanted to something else, like, but I'm not going to do that right now. And then you can see we have a hash. And so in YAML, a hash is a comment. And so this is just telling us some information. And the first thing that's in here is credits true. And if we have that and credits true, what it's doing is adding get way down here to the bottom of the page, it's adding this little block of text right here. So if we want, we can comment that out, and we could save that. And now we get past this 3 little dots, and now we're into the actual markdown content of our page. You're going to see that at the top of this about page, Devin says you can actually just delete out this credits true, which is true, but I'm sure that some of you will want to put the credits back in. So you could just comment it out. We're starting out here with something that actually isn't Markdown. It looks a little bit confusing and weird. And so these are our includes. And what the includes do is that they let us add in some more complicated HTML into our page without having to write it all out onto this Markdown stub, which becomes very tedious. And so these are pre-designed features that we can add into the page that come with CollectionBuilder, the little modular chunks that we've written. A lot of them match Bootstrap components, and then some of them are specialized for CollectionBuilder, and most of them involve trying to work with the collection objects that we have. And so each of these, you'll see it says there's a curly bracket, percentage sign, and a space. That's the sign that this is liquid. And so this isn't visually on the page. This is a bit of code, liquid templating language that we're going to use to do something. And so then we give it a command. We give liquid a command, which is include, and then we give it a file, features/jumbotron.html. And so what liquid does is it goes up here into this includes folder. It looks into this feature folder, and it finds jumbotron.html. And so what liquid's going to do is it's going to replace this little line of code with this code here. And so that's not Markdown. So we're going to jump past that because we're talking about Markdown right now. So these are just adding in some features to our page. And so what those Jumbotron, let's go back to the top of our page here. So this is that Jumbotron include. So we didn't have to write any of this code. We just wrote that include. The second little include that we see is that feature nav menu. And so that's this little feature right here. We didn't have to write that code. It gets generated. And then finally, we get down to this place where it says about the collection. And so now we're finally into some Markdown, which is right here. So Markdown is a simplified format for writing HTML. And it's really designed to be a human readable, really simple way to write. So you don't have to write all the pointy brackets that you would normally write to have to create some HTML. And so it represents all the real basic parts of HTML content. You can also intersperse normal HTML with your Markdown, because any HTML is actually valid for Markdown as well. But the main point is to be able to write these kind of long form content without having to get out your pointy brackets and learn about HTML in general. And so the first thing that we see in our Markdown here is going to be, is 2 pound signs, a space, and then some text, and then a new line after it. And what that represents, so that 2 pound sign space, some text, and then a new line is a header. And so in HTML, we have a lot of conventions, just like in a printed book, where bigger, bolder text means that it's a section of the content, and it's differentiated from paragraphs. And so what you see here is a header 2. 2 hashes will become a header 2. 1 hash becomes a header 1. 3 hashes becomes a header 3, and it just goes up in what sizes you have there. And so actually, let me do this one here. Sorry. I want to do a quick demonstration of that. So so what we have here is our hash space, some text, a new line, 2 hashes space, text, new line. So these are our headers. And when we render that, you can see header 1 is bigger, header 2 is a little bit smaller, header 3 is a little bit smaller than that. Now, if you have any text with no lines in between it, that's like this with no hashes or anything, it's just going to become a paragraph. So we can do that. So you can see this just becomes a paragraph. And then we have all the other basic functions that we can write with Markdown. So I'm going to start doing some of that as an example in my page here. So I have about the collection, blah, 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 blah. And I'm gonna add a new section here. I'm gonna delete this. Actually, what you can do is you can just delete all this content, right? So I have a new header that says about the collection. I'm gonna leave a blank space before starting a new paragraph. And I'm gonna say, this is a new paragraph. This is part of the same paragraph. Because there's not a line break. So you can see this is really simple. I mean, you just write and it's totally readable. It's basically, it's designed on how people natively write emails is how he created this spec. And so you can see we have this header 2, we have a paragraph, and then we have a separate paragraph. So now let's do a header 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we can put this content in there as well. And then maybe we want to do a list. And so a list, what you do is you do a dash or a minus sign or a dash, and then you say whatever content it is on one line, and then you press return and you do another one, dash space. And then you do another one, dash space, another one, dash space, and then leave a blank line after it. And that's going to be a list. We can also do an ordered list. So we can do that by giving a number, a period, and a space. And you can actually just give any number and it'll automatically get numbered correctly. You just have to follow that pattern of number, period, space to start an ordered list. So you can see I'm just making up numbers here. And if we press Control S to save it, and it's going to rebuild. Oop. Sorry, I'm having some serious zoom in the way problems. All right, so now if I refresh my page, here's my header 2, here's my header 3, here's that unordered list, and here's an ordered list. Okay, so any questions about the totally basics of Markdown? The idea here is just to really lower that barrier so that getting to start write content for your site. Mm-hmm. The other really important thing is to now, those are our kind of block elements. The other elements that we need to get to are inline elements. And so the first one that is important is a link. And how you do a link is a square bracket and then the hyperlink text. CollectionBuilder, and then close the square bracket, start a parentheses, and then you're going to paste the link into there. So if I like to do a Control V to paste in, and then I close that with a parentheses. And if I press Control S to save that, that's going to become a hyperlink on my page. The other inline elements that you can do is if you want to do some bold, it'll be 2 asterisks to start it, 2 asterisks to close it. Everything in between those two things will become bold. If you want to do some italics, you do just a single asterisk. And so in HTML speak, a single asterisk is emphasis, and 2 asterisks is called strong. And so HTML is supposed to be semantic. It's supposed to be not just about how it's styled, it's supposed to be what the meaning of that markup is. So here we have our strong, here we have our emphasis, and there's our hyperlink. So those are inline elements with Markdown. So that's really all the Markdown that you need to know to start writing some pretty engaging and amazing content. But what we want to do is be able to get some of our collection objects into this this content so that we can tell stories and interpret this collection and provide those narratives to our users. Does anyone have questions about Markdown before I start going into these includes? All right. So the method for adding our collection objects and adding some style into this without having to write a whole bunch of HTML is to use these includes that I've already kind of previewed. And so what you're going to do is you go into your includes folder, and we have this folder called feature. And then these are all of the pre-designed includes that can add features into your content. So what I want to do is I want to add an image in into my my narrative here. And actually what I'll do is, okay. So I'm going to go to this image include. I just click on includes feature image. And you're going to see at the top of it is some liquid that says comment. And so everything from comment down to end comment is not code. It's our message to you, the user, trying to explain how to use this include. And so there's pretty good information here explaining exactly what it does and how it's trying to do it. And then it also will give you, every one of our includes has an example that you can just copy. And so what I'm going to do is copy it. So I highlight that by, I like to put my cursor here, and then I like to go down to the end and hold shift and then click there. And that highlights that bit of text for me. And then I do a Control-C to copy it. And then I pop back over to my about page here. And I'm going to put in a Control-V, and I'm going to put that include code on to its own line between these two paragraphs. And you're going to see that this is our liquid. So we have that curly bracket %sign. This is the liquid command include. This is the file that we're going to include. And then you're going to see that we have an option that we want to pass to this include. And so exactly what those options are all documented here inside of the include comments so that you can figure out exactly what those options are. But for the including objects from your collection, the basic way to do it is just to use the object ID of an item from your collection, because then it will be able to pull in all the information it needs from your metadata. And so let's go and find something interesting to add to our collection. So maybe that's not very interesting. This Frank Robinson with a car. You can see that I have the object ID right here in the URL. So that's how I like to just go grab it. And then I go and I paste that object ID right here. So we have object ID equals, and then we have quote, and then I put an object ID in there, and then the quote, and then this %sign curly bracket closes that liquid. So now if I press Control-S to save that, you're going to see my terminal updates telling me that it's rebuilding that site again. And after a second, we can go back and look at the about page. And you're going to see now we have our markdown, blah, blah, blah. And then we have this image just right in the page. And it has, you can see it has a link going back to that item page. And it has a, the title of the page is here as a caption to the image. And it's big. And so let's add another image into this include. So maybe we want his car and him playing the organ. So I'm going to grab that object ID from that URL there. And we can just go in here, and where I have this object ID option in my include, I can put a semicolon, and I'll paste in Control-V to paste in that second object ID. Actually, let's make it 3 images. How about that? And oh, another one of the car, I guess. So I'm going to copy that again. I'm going to put in a semicolon. I'm going to paste that object ID in and press Control-S to save that page and let it rebuild. And you're going to see our new about page feature. So now we have this kind of little gallery of 3 items. Each of them have their caption, which is the title of the image. Notice I didn't have to write that, it's getting pulled out of the metadata, and they all have a link going back to that item in the collection so that you can view the item page. So we can do that for a lot of these different features. There's you can include some audio, you could include you know, the different PDF, and so all the different types of items that you might have, or a video is a good one. So we could do the video one. I'll do that really quick. So I just went over to this video include. It has this example right here. So I'm just going to copy that example with Control-C, and I'm going to paste it in right here in my paragraph. I'm pasting it onto its own line. I need to have a video item. And so if I go over to the home page of my collection, I can go down to right here, there's these object types. And if I click on video, it's going to get me to the browse with just this video item. I can grab the object ID off of it and paste that into the object ID option on my video include, and press Control-S to save that. And so you can add all of the different types of items onto your narrative page. And so here's this big video that will play right there directly. Oh, I got to watch an ad. Nice. That will play. Wait, no, that's just the intro. Okay, never mind. That will play inside of your narrative there.
Yeah,
maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Would you also show how to just add one image and make it smaller?
Yeah, and so I'm going to do that with my video right now. So you're going to see, so yeah, so this video seems like it's too big right now. It's taking up a little bit too much screen real estate. And so what I want to do is look at the options in this include, and you're going to see we have this object ID, that's what you're using. And then there's this option right here that says width. And then it says you can choose from 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100. And so if I go in here, I'm going to add a new option onto this include, and it's got to be width equals quote. So then I got to choose one of those options. So I'm going to say 50 and see how that goes, and end the quote. Make sure that you, if you start something with a quote, you always got to make sure that you end it with a quote. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then we do a Control-S to save it. And so everything in HTML and Liquid is nested. So you always have to open and then close your quotes, your brackets, and all of that sort of thing. So then if we refresh it, you're going to see now our little feature here is actually a more reasonable width relative to the page. So it doesn't have to be this huge giant feature if we don't want it to be. So that's kind of how the includes work, how you have, so you have the include command, you have these include options, which are all documented inside the comments of each of these includes. And so you can really quickly start building up some pages with your content and adding, you know, narrative and interpretation around these objects, while still pointing in to those collections so that people can get, or into those objects so that people can get the full information about those objects and download them and stuff like that. Any questions about kind of how these includes work at this point? You know, it's very whirlwind, and none of this stuff really makes sense until you've tried it multiple times and ran into the issues and questions that you end up running into. But I'd just like to walk you through it. So the next thing that I want to walk you through is adding a new page, because really, you know, we have one about page that's in that default template, but we hope that you will actually add more interpretation than just a single page. So we're going to do that. So what we'll do is, if you want to add a new page, we're going to go into this pages folder here. And I like to just click this button up here that says new file. And it's going to open up this little box where you can give a name to your file. And so I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it history.md. And you want to use that .md extension to make sure that it knows that it is a Markdown file. And so I get a new blank plain text file that's going to become a Markdown file. And the first thing that we need is we need that front matter. And so what I'm going to do is actually just copy the front matter out of an existing one to make it easy for myself. So I have this little front matter block. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to give this page a new title. So I'm going to call it History of the Collection. We can give it a layout, should either be about, or if you want it to look like the about page currently looks, or you can give it the page layout, would be another good option there. And then we also need to give it a unique permalink, so that the place where it is going to be located on the site. And so usually we just match that to the file name in most cases. So we're going to call this history.html as its final location on our website. And then these three little dots, or these three little dashes, are going to end our front matter link. And we want to add a header in there that probably is going to match the title of the page usually, but it might depend on what you're how you're using this page. And I'm just going to do Control S to save that. If I open up my terminal, you're going to see that I have this new page. It's got to rebuild to create it. Now, if I go over to my site and I refresh, you're going to see it doesn't show up because we don't automatically add stuff into the nav. You have to do that manually. But we can still visit the page because it does exist. It's being built. And we could do that by adding in that permalink at the top here. So I'm going to go to history.html, and here is my new page that I'm working on. I'm going to go ahead and populate it with some just lorem ipsum text. So I'm going to go over to my page here. I just pasted in a bunch of lorem ipsum, this Latin gibberish, to give it some fake content. And then maybe we want to add in some features like we had. So maybe I'm going to copy the same include right here. And maybe I want to add another kind of feature. I'm going to add a card, which is a Bootstrap feature. And so I'm going to copy the example here. And so a card is just a little way to set your text apart from the rest of the text. And I'm going to actually just put this, let's see, I'll put this paragraph in there. All right, and then I'm going to say example card, and the card needs an image. So I go find an image in our collection. Photograph of 3 men. The card doesn't necessarily need an image, but we're going to have one in this case. And I'll paste that in there. So you can see that now we have some paragraphs of text. We have some includes in there, a different kind of include. Maybe we want another header down below that. And I'm going to do my Control S to rebuild that. And we'll see how our new history page is. All right, so here's our new history of the collection page. So we have our fake text. We have our new includes here. We have this example card. So we have an image on the top of it. You have this little title on the top. We have this text inside of a box. And then we have some more example text. You're going to see it doesn't have that little nav feature that we had on the about page. So I'm going to add that one in quick just to show you how that one works. So it has this include feature nav menu. I'm going to put that at the top of my about page here. And what it's going to do, it has to add some links into the sections that you've described. And so what you need to do to get these sections to work is to just copy the text that you have as a header and exactly paste that in and separate them with a semicolon. So I'm going to do that. I copy this with the Control C. After the semicolon, I paste it in there. And then I'm going to Control S to save that. And we'll see that nav menu show up. So now I have this nav menu showing up. And we have a bug in there, I guess. Actually, we should go fix this. Okay, yeah, somebody's asking about the way that the about page with the very narrow content. We really liked kind of narrowing down your content really makes it a lot more readable for people. And so with this narratives, we thought we'd like a narrow page, narrow text block with large features inside of it. We're not super in love with it anymore. We redesigned it like a year ago, and we're actually working on another redesign of it that has automatically generated side nav. And so look for that coming out maybe by next fall. Because yeah, we're not totally in love with this either. We find that it's very useful though, like to get a narrower page block, text block, to make it easier to read narrative content in a long form manner. So you can see I've put that page together. We have this history page that's pretty good with just pasting a bunch of stuff in there. This card is obviously too big, so we could add a width in there, but I'm not going to do that right now. But how do we get to this page now? We don't have it in the nav, and so that means that we're going to have to go in and do that config nav to add a link to this page into our navigation menu. So what I'm going to do is pop over to anyone have questions about creating a page from scratch? Okay, and this is all documented pretty well, and so you can follow that along. We have this underscore data file where we have all of this, our metadata and all our configs. And so we go in there, and we go over to this config nav. And I like to do a hold Alt and click on the file so that it'll split my editor so I can look at two things at once. And so if we want to just add it in here, we can put in this, we give it a name. What is the display in our nav bar? And then we got to give the stub. And so the stub is going to match the permalink value that you set. So I'm going to paste that in. You can see I just put my cursor there. I hold Shift and highlight that text, do a Control C, and then do a Control V to paste it in. And if I press Control S on this config nav, it's going to add it into the nav. So now we have it in the nav, and we can navigate back and forth. Okay, but now I'm going to create a whole bunch of these interpretive pages, and it's starting to get kind of big in our nav here. So what if we want those interpretive pages to be grouped together in a dropdown? And so I'll show you how that works in this config nav. So to start that, we need to actually add in a parent. And so we're going to call it about. And with a parent, we do not give it any stub. And then this one is going to be called about the collection. And this one is going to be called history of the collection. And maybe this one is actually called about Psychiana, but I can't spell that, so I'm not going to do it. And what we need to do is to make these appear underneath this new heading that I have about. We need to call, we need to add one more column to that option, and we're going to put in the drop-down parent. It's going to have to exactly match this display name that we have set. So now I have this kind of empty row that just has about, and then I have this one that is about the collection, has a stub, and then it has one more option there, the drop-down parent, that exactly matches one of the names that we have up here. And if I press the Control S on that, we're going to see our drop-down show up. All right, so now you can see we have this drop-down that just says about, and when we click it, oh, we have a bug in this, which is we should definitely fix like right now. All right, what is going on? Sorry about this, guys. Okay. Okay, so now we have a drop down that you cannot access because of the nav for some reason. So sorry about that bug, but we have a drop down here, and we can go there and switch between these two pages. Does that make sense, how to add a drop down into your nav config?
Well, one question I have, just because I'm using a laptop, so it's quite small. When you have the parent, it looked to me as if there was about, comma, period.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, maybe I'll
Increase your size there. Yeah.
Size. It's already quite large on my computer, so
Oh, sorry.
it's getting harder to edit. But hold on. Here we are.
Okay, I see.
So it's a comma.
Okay.
And so yeah, no, these are all CSVs, and so the CSVs,
Yeah.
you know, you don't need to open this up in a spreadsheet to edit it. You can just edit it in your terminal if it's, or in your text editor if it's pretty a simple one.
Okay.
But you can see that this is just a CSV. It's if we open it up in a spreadsheet, there would be 3 columns: display name, stub, drop down parent. But when we look at it in the editor, it's just rows with commas. And so to create that top level one that is going to become the drop down, you're going to give it a display name and then 2 commas.
Yeah.
You actually don't even need to add those commas because Jekyll's very forgiving that you don't need to make your CSVs exactly to spec. And so if you leave those commas out, it'll actually still work for the blank row. It won't work if you leave commas out other places, but for a blank row, you can leave them out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And so yeah, you can, if you wanted to, we could add another drop down. So we could say, let's say we want to call it explore. Let's say we want to de-emphasize some of these features, but still have them available. So we could add the subjects into there. We can add the map into there. We could add the timeline into there. We could add the data into there. And then I do a Control S. So I have this blank row that just says Explore. And then you can see I did a comma and then added Explore, which exactly matches that display name of the parent to each of these rows to create another dropdown. And okay. So now if we refresh, we now have this very much smaller compact nav bar with dropdowns instead. And so you can go browse. Okay, wait, let's go look at the timeline. And you can see that the correct page is highlighted in there and stuff like that. So those are a good option to try to kind of clean up and organize the content on your site to get so that their users can kind of understand how to navigate it in an efficient and useful manner. In your footer, you also will have this nav repeated, but it doesn't have the dropdowns in it. And so the first item in this list on your dropdown is the link that will be used in the footer. Okay, I believe that's actually what I wanted to cover for introducing Markdown, introducing how to use those liquid includes to pull the objects into your content, how to add a new page, and then how to update that navigation so that you can access these new pages that you've created. And so I think now we're going to turn over to Devin to give you a deeper dive into how these pages actually get pulled together underneath. And I'll stop sharing. Unless you have questions about the nav or the Markdown or the includes at the level that we've done at this point.
Okay. I need to be made a host. I think I logged in. Wait.
I don't think I can do that. I think Evan has to do that now because he's the host.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so now I'm moving my stuff over. So now we're at how Jekyll builds the homepage section. And there are 2 things you can follow along. The bullets page here is what I'm going to kind of walk through. And these, I tried to put these together kind of informally, sort of talky, so that you can go and refer back to them if you'd like. And then I have a model of what that page looks like that we're going to look at in a second. Let's look though. We're going to be in the Visual Studio Code itself. And is this large enough for folks to see my code? Does that look okay, Olivia?
It looks good. I think you got some. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So I'm on the, so here we are in the folder of files in CollectionBuilder template. If you have stuff open, like if you had this open, for instance, this is a great little button to close everything and kind of pop it up. You can also close everything open here in the editors too. And we're just going to look at the index .md file. And so Evan went over what Markdown was and kind of talked to you about a lot of the sort of individual features of a Markdown file. In any website, the index.html is that root directory. So that whenever you click on like google.com, it's google.com/index.html. And so for a Jekyll project, you're always going to have either an index.md or it could be an index.html file, but it should have the same format using this front matter. So again, the front matter starts here. It starts with 3 dashes and ends with 3 dashes. You have a title here. In contrast to you also have a layout, which we're going to go look at, the home infographic. And then this one doesn't need a permalink because it's at the root of the folder itself, so that you could put it there. But if you wanted to change the permalink and mess your whole thing up, you could change it just by adding permalink. So so that is the index.
Devin, before you get to the next step, I was going to remind you to pull changes.
Pull the changes. I'm so bad. All right. So let me fetch my origin. It might have been interesting to show them what would happen if I did not, but it's not good practice. So I refreshed, and now I'm pulling the origin in, and now I have the new site available. Okay. So now I'm back. So we're at the home infographic, and so let's go look at, and you can see it's kind of cool to see how those things change. You know, when you pull that in and you have your server up, you'll see that what was changed. So the config nav, the history page, and the about page. The next part is we want to kind of look at the layout files themselves. And so we're going to go up to the _layout folder, and let's go look at the home infographic start here. And you can see here, it's quite complex. And so, but you can also see that it starts with front matter, just like the index.md. And so this is the default homepage with boxes providing collection stats. Again, it has a hash mark there, so that's a comment that's human readable. And then you can see it's a layout of a page. So, well, what's a page look like? So then it's referencing a page. Oh, here is another layout that is the layout of a page that also has this content piece here, which is going to pull in any content created by pages kind of outside of it and then at the very bottom, this has a layout too called default. So let's look at that. And so here's our default layout. And so all of the layout pages kind of cascade down into this default. And that way they're able to load these includes the kind of collection banners, the nav, the head that would go into the meta object options in any HTML file, the footer, the foot, and the scroll to top button. So this is the kind of base overview of the default layout. But what we're going to talk about specifically is the home infographic. Here we are. You can see there's no. One thing to note here in the home page is there's no I'll show you what it would look like. There's no content moment. The one thing about content is with a Markdown file, anything below the so this is content for page. Anything below the front matter becomes content. So here's content for this page, and then if we go back up to the home infographic, we have this content on the home page now. So if we go and look at that, see where that shows up. You can see it just shows up as a paragraph because it's being written in Markdown above that piece. But we don't include anything. We don't include content in our home infographic just for that reason. And instead, we include a series of boxes and sort of features that you can learn to customize in much the same way that Evan demonstrated some of the features that you're able to customize in the About page. So let's look at our page again. You can see we have some pieces on over here. We have a description, the time span, the top subjects, the locations. We have the images, and we have a kind of overview of the objects. We have this carousel, and we have the downloadable sort of collections as data piece as well. And so it's always interesting to sort of see what this would look like in because especially Bootstrap, which is kind of which I'll talk about in a second, is the overlying cascading style sheet that's defining that. And Bootstrap's main feature in the beginning, and still to this day, is that it's responsive, so it'll work on your phone. So if you ever wanted to see what it would look like on a phone, you right-click on a page, go down to Inspect, which will show you your inspector tools, and then you can click this little toggle device toolbar and see exactly what it looks like as on a much smaller screen. And so you can see that these kind of, these grid-like systems become separated down into kind of 100% width features. There's the carousel, there's the time span, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to turn that off. And so now we kind of see where that is. And if we go back in, you can see there's, and I'll talk about this in a moment, there's columns and rows, and this is all kind of Bootstrap pieces, but there's all these different features showing up. So how is this kind of, and again, what Evan was sort of explaining before, all these includes are just, pre-configured HTML sort of pieces that you can go and add and edit yourself, but or by using the options provided in the in the comments on each of these pieces. So I wanted to show, though, a kind of my really bizarre model of how I'll push this up all the way. How this kind of page gets built, because I'm sort of talking all over the place and jumping around. And so I wanted to kind of show at the very base. So if you look at, at the bottom is this index.md, and there was not a whole lot of content in there. It's really just a stub that points to the layout for the home infographic. And then the home infographic itself is pulling in a bunch of pre-configured HTML options, the include features. So it's got a featured term, which we'll look at. It has a time part, it has the objects, it has that carousel, etc. And all of that is going back into that home infographic. The home infographic then has a layout of page, which we just use basically to kind of center and control the contents on any HTML page. And then page goes up into that default HTML layout that then pulls in the kind of basic, the header pieces, the meta option, the meta pieces that get picked up by Google, the SEO, the collection banner itself, the collection nav, the footer, etc. And then what Jekyll does is it pulls all of that together and generates the main index.html file, which is then served as the home page of your collection. So it's it's all kind of complicated, and I kind of think of it as a nested Russian doll. And it's just things within things within things, and then Jekyll kind of unpacks those all into one page that a user can explore. But let's look at the actual includes on this page and see about changing some of the commands and some of the features and some of the design of the page itself. So as you can see, we have two columns on the top that are, one's about 2/3 of the page, the other's 1/3 of the page with 4 features in it. And so let's see how that is represented. This is Bootstrap. Bootstrap is based with classes and JavaScript, but mostly via class. You write the classes and that controls how things look. And Bootstrap operates on a grid system. So it always starts with the row, and then within that, there are columns, and it's on a 12-span system. So let me show you a little overview of that system. So I'll scroll up here. This is, Evan and Olivia, I can put this in the chat room. This is the grid. This is an overview of how things get set up and how Bootstrap works with code. And so the most basic would be a row, and then 3 columns, which would always get kind of responsively worked into being, you can see it. They're always going to be 3 of them. And then as you expand and you want your work to be responsive, you'll add these little indicators about the size of the screen. So you have extra small, small, medium, large, XL, and extra, extra large now. And you can see here in this grid, this changes how those boxes show up based on the width of the screen that the user is using. So we often use MD or LG as our base kind of grid option here. And so anything at a larger screen than 720 will react, and anything smaller than, or anything at a larger screen than 768 will be in this column features, and anything smaller than that will go to the responsive 100% width feature. So as you can see, we have it's a 12, again, it's a sort of 12 base. So 8 is going to be 2/3 of a page, and 4 will be 1/3. If we wanted to put that into equal pieces, we would turn that to 6, which would make it half. And then we could see what that does. And you can see down below that full data download piece, which goes the width of our content, is at 12 because that's fully there. So let's look at what happens. Oh, that's not right. Okay. So now we've changed that to 6. And you can see now it's equal columns. So it's a little bit of math, but it's not that bad. And you can see, just by looking, that there's a lot of features that you can start to mess with here too. So then if you wanted to kind of like, change up what your homepage looks like entirely, you have a lot of options. And so say you wanted like to start, I want my carousel to be full on right when you get right when I get to the page. And I don't want this description at the top. So I'm going to remove this description. And by doing that, I push Control X. I highlighted it and push Control X, and then I'm going to just drop it down into this call me 6. And I want the carousel actually to be a lot bigger. So I'm going to change 6 to 12 so that it's full screen. And you can see here, just like the include features that we were looking at earlier, these are include index. So you can see that there's a bunch of different ones here. And so for carousel, I can go to carousel and see, oh, I can add all of these different features. I can choose the maximum number of images, the height, the title, the header, even the button color. So I'm not going to change too many of those, but I do think 300 pixels, and this is in pixels as a height, is too small. So I'm going to change this to 500, and let's go see what that looks like. I keep trying to access the editor here. Okay, so refresh, and now we have a really big carousel that's pushing it over. And then below we have, we're still in a half column here underneath it. So once Bootstrap gets to that 12, anything past that becomes kind of in a new row and will be pushed out here. And so say we wanted to kind of, okay, well, that doesn't look so great underneath, but I do like this feature here. Why don't we go and change the math here and set these out into different pieces? So we've got subjects, locations, objects, etc. So we could do a couple different things. I often like to just grab, let's say we split them into halves, and we'll have 2 different columns here. So I'm copying in order to close the div. So each div, and div is an HTML element that is a division on the page. Each div can have a class that then separates pieces out. And so but you'll need to close the div above it. So that's why I'm grabbing these 2 lines. It's the closing div tag and the opening div tag. And okay, so the description's a little large. This is large. And then I'm going to paste that into this piece so that we now have 1 large column, full width column, and then 2 half width columns underneath that. I'm going to save it. And these feature different pieces of information and different includes features. And now we'll go back and let's see what that looks like. Okay, and so now we have a little better, sort of a nicely laid out page. There are a lot of different options you can see here, but maybe I don't want one of these options. Maybe I don't want the description, and the objects is kind of tall. So I could think of many different ways to kind of go through this and separate this. Sorry, just open my Word. So let's say I don't really want the description. I think I got enough there. And maybe I want actually each of these in their own little piece. So I'm going to make that a call me 3. So that's going to be a quarter of the page. And I'll copy, and I'm going to make this a call me 3. And I'm going to copy that closing and opening tag. And then I'm just going to put everything in a closing and opening tag here. And now that should separate it out. into a 4-piece here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, and so now it's even more compact, but we're still getting a lot of information. I like this layout. It's pretty great. And now I wanted Olivia's going to look closely at this timeline.js feature, but I just wanted to show how that would work and how you would add that to the piece. So here we are. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to show you. I'm sorry. So the featured terms here. This is the include featured term, and if you wanted to see, this is a pretty powerful piece. So if you wanted to change, they have some examples here. You could change the different the field here to something else, and that field will then be pulled from your metadata. So there's a specific field in Psychiana that we like to use, this item information field. I'm going to go to the metadata and grab that. And I'm going to go back to the home infographic and say, I don't think the locations field is that interesting. So I'm going to change this field to item information, and we'll say physical formats. And you can also change the button color here. The button color for this one is primary. These are all those Bootstrap's colors that they use. And if you wanted this to just be, this has an outline in its secondary, but maybe you wanted it to be outline primary. And we'll see how that looks like as well. So now we go back and check the page. There's our full width carousel. Let's see below that it's just about to finish and it's generating. Okay, so now we've changed that locations to physical formats. We've changed the style of the button. And you could do that you could bring in any sort of field from your page and change that little card and have that as a feature. So it's a really powerful one. And then the last piece here I want to talk about is just adding. So I like the carousel, but what would be cool is having timeline.js at the top. And so you can use, as we saw with the about page, you have all these. I'm going to close this and look at the includes. What we're using on the index page on the home infographic are all of these features in the index folder in the includes. But you can also use any feature in the feature folder as well. So I'm going to use this timeline.js feature. I'm going to go to timeline.js. I'm looking at the comments saying, oh, okay, cool. I can just add this in and we'll get a full timeline.js for that. And there are a lot of options here, and Olivia's going to go over some more of that. But let's get rid of this carousel and use this as a feature. We've saved it, and now we're ready to go. This is essentially just going to generate a timeline.js feature from the entirety of our metadata for the site. So let's refresh that. And now we have this really nice timeline.js interactive feature that goes through chronologically through the collection and features that. And there are ways to kind of curate and specify on this, and Olivia is going to talk about that. So that is the extent of my piece here. Are there any questions about that? You have a lot of power with this. You can do a lot of different features. You can add a card or or you can just add Markdown itself and do some more writing. But there's a lot you can do with the homepage. We tried to make it really malleable and easy to mess around with too. But that Bootstrap piece is really important too, to understand that grid and how to kind of lay it out. And it just takes a few kind of practices and you're like, oh, I get this. It's not too bad. Any questions? Seeing none, I will pass it over to Olivia. Thank you all.
Can you push your changes, Devin?
Yes.
I was gonna quick, can I show something quick, Olivia?
Yeah.
Sorry. And so we had a couple questions about, like forefronting your interpretive pages versus, the built-in stuff and the collection. And so here's an example that we've shown a couple people where they've really kind of pushed the collection to the back, and there's just a lot of content pages. And so you can see in their homepage, they've actually done a lot of customization to just write it as an interpretive page. There's still some of these automatically generated bits, but then a lot of it is an interpretive page. And then you can see in their nav is all interpretive pages. And when you click into there, you're getting to an item page and you can get to the browse, but you can see that the browse isn't even featured in their navigation because they're really focusing in on that interpretive work. And so even though by default, Collection Builder is looking a lot like just a base digital collection, as you can see, you can very quickly use these little components to rework it in a totally different way and really forefront different aspects of how the collection works. So I just wanted to make sure that people saw that as an example.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start by pulling the changes that Devin made. Once those are loaded, then I can go to my layouts and go to Home Infographic and see all those changes he just made. I also have, I'll put this in the chat. Nope, hold on. The Timeline.js documentation. So this documentation has some good steps for basically 3 different things you can do, kind of getting more and more customized with each one. The first step on the documentation here is just including it on the home page, but you can include that. You can use this include anywhere. So you can use it on about pages too, if you'd rather have your timeline.js be there. You can replace the current timeline page with a completely new timeline page that's just timeline.js, or add 2 timeline pages. And then you can also jump down to step 2, which is curating your timeline.js feature, and where you get the option to choose kind of what elements you want to appear actually in your timeline.js. So that's where I'm going to start today. So if I refresh with those new changes, I can see in the timeline now that there are all types of objects. There are images and PDFs being included in this timeline. So I can see the PDFs look like that. Images look like this. But say maybe you have a collection where the PDFs are boring, or maybe they don't add much to the timeline, and so you'd rather have only images in your timeline. I can do that by coming here, and we have our first example here is this little bit of include code that tells you how to limit to image. So I'm going to show you where you can add that little bit of code in. So if I switch back to my Visual Studio Code and go to down to assets and data, and what we're looking for is a timeline.js JSON data that is actually generating our timeline.js feature. So this is actually taking, if we look at the very first bit of liquid code here, we are taking the site's metadata, and right now we are just saying if, for all the items, if an item has a date, put it into the timeline.js feature. So we want to narrow that down a little bit. We want it first to look for dates, but then we also want it to add or just only show the images. So I can do that by adding another little pipe there, and then going back to this documentation, you can just copy it here and paste that in and save. And then refresh. And now if I page through, I should see only images. So I've skipped those 2 PDFs that were there. So you can do that for a lot of different fields. Say if you only want items in your time to show up in the timeline.js, if they have a specific subject, you could do that. or if they have a specific file name. The other example in the documentation is maybe you just want to show during 1 year. So if you want to do that, you can just specify with that date, the date section here. And instead of saying just any item that has a date, you could say item when item date contains 1935. And we can do that just with images first and see how many images we have in 1935. And we have a few. Or we could get rid of our image filter here. And then see some of the PDFs from that year too. So this is a big year in this collection. It has quite a bit of information. So that's, you can play around with that. It's a really powerful feature to be able to limit what items are occurring in that timeline with Liquid. And it requires very little work on your part to have to reconfigure the data or sort it by hand. You also have the option though to create, you could create a completely new spreadsheet if you want to. Maybe say you have like a really big collection, but there's just a certain number of items you really want to tell a story with your timeline.js. You can do that by say that this is like your a new spreadsheet that you want to create just the timeline data with. I've just taken the metadata here and I'm going to delete a lot of it. And maybe, so maybe I'll just have 15 items in my timeline, delete the rest. And this will be a new spreadsheet, so I don't want to replace my metadata with it. So I maybe will say Psychiana timeline. And then I want to add a new column called headline. And if you are customizing, then you might want to write, this is going to be what shows up in place of the title on your timeline. So maybe for your timeline, you're getting really into it and want to customize those titles for your items instead of having them be the same titles that you see on their item pages. In my case, for the sake of being quick here, I'm just going to copy the title over. And once I have that headline bit, then I'm good to go. So I have this unique data set that I can use for my timeline now. I can export it as a CSV again. And then go find it where it downloaded. And name it to what I want it to be named. And I'll drop it into the data folder just with all the other data. And then if we look back at the documentation here, I see that I need to change. I don't want my JSON to be produced from the site's metadata anymore. I actually want to specify that it's coming from a brand new spreadsheet that I just uploaded. And then I want all of my items to have that headline. So I'm going to sort by headline. So I'm going to come back over to my JSON file. And I want to edit this, get rid of the site metadata here. So again, this is saying in your Jekyll project, look in the data folder. So that's what that's indicating that we're looking in the data folder. And right now it's pointing to our site metadata, which we've already configured in our config. So if we come back here, it's saying whatever the value for this metadata is, that's the file name that you're looking for in the data folder to pull from. But in this case, we don't want that site metadata anymore. So we can just delete this portion and instead say type a period, and then just copy this file name here. And go back to the JSON file and paste in Psychiana timeline. So you could type that out too, but just to make sure there aren't any typos, you want this value right here to match whatever the new spreadsheet is that you just uploaded. And then we do want to make sure everything has a date, so I'm going to leave that there first, and then add another where expression. So add another pipeline. And now I want to signify that if an item has that a value for headline, it should be pulled into my timeline. So if I save this, go to refresh. Now I should have a limited timeline. Yeah, so I'm just starting in the year 1934 now and going through only 15 items on this timeline. Are there questions, or can I show anything else to help? Or are you guys, does this making sense?
I want to answer, Brian asked about, is it possible to like use Liquid to create a sort of range or subset using those where expressions? And it is, but it does get complicated with Liquid fast. Liquid's is a pretty simplified little language, and so there's not just a simple expression that's like between these two things. You can sort of be two expressions essentially. It'd be like is less than this and is more than that, which is actually not impossible, but so you could do that with Liquid, but a lot of times what we do is go to the metadata and make a custom version, because it's a lot easier for to work with metadata, because that's what we're good at, right? And working with spreadsheets is often the easiest, most pragmatic way to create these more customized versions of the timeline, rather than trying to work with your full metadata in complicated ways. One other little thing that I would also point out is that so Olivia's been changing up that default timeline.js data in the assets data folder, and that is the one that is also highlighted in the data downloads. And so in some cases you might want to think about that include lets you say a different file name rather than the default one. And so if you wanted to still have people be able to download the full collection timeline js.json, you could leave that one and you just create a copy of it. You just say save as and have it like curated timeline JSON, and then you can specify that in the include that you're using that smaller set. So then that full set would still be available for download or to use in a full version too. So that's just one of the options that is available there too, if you wanted to maintain that full version.
Yeah, and so you're talking about the full version being all of the metadata included in
the like the unfiltered,
the one I just made. Yeah.
So you don't have to always, you can specify which JSON file you want to use, and so you could just copy that, and that customized version would be like timeline.js curated or whatever, and then in your include you say JSON timeline customized JSON. So that was a way to maintain both of those files.
Great.
In most cases, people aren't going to care, but you might. Claire?
Yeah, so this is what sorry, I hope I'm not breaking up too much. This is what I was asking by email yesterday. So if I understand this correctly, I could go to use the official timeline.js template that they have on the website. I could put in an entirely different timeline than my collection metadata, and then use that as my CSV file to create the timeline.
Yes, you would just need to make sure that your objects are like either they're in your repository and you have a path to them, or they're served somewhere else. Because if you're having completely new data for a completely new timeline, is that what you're saying? That like you would have a timeline of objects from another collection, or like outside objects, or?
Actually, what I'm kind of thinking about, since I'm a historian, is that the objects are illustrations maybe of a bigger historical event. I use the example in email, say, of the French Revolution, where I might have a class choose objects from any period of the French Revolution, but we might create a timeline that wasn't based on the objects, but was based on events of the French Revolution. Am I making any sense on that? So that really I'm wondering, can you just insert a historical timeline that isn't necessarily based on the collection, but could be part of the interpretive elements that you add to make sense of the collection?
So I think there's a couple approaches. One is if you have a working timeline JS or any other thing that can be embedded in a page already, you can just embed that into your Markdown page, just like any other site on the web. So if we do get pulled to get this new stuff, and so if we go over to timeline.js, and there's like a working example, where's an embed? I have it. Shoot. Okay, I'm not going to have this after all. So it'll give you, when you build your timeline.js using their builder, it gives you a little embed code. You can just copy that embed code into your Markdown file, and then you're hosting it from content from timeline.js. So you don't need to move all that stuff into your repository if you don't want to. Same with, say a YouTube video or a, Vimeo video or any kind of interactive content where you go and they give you that embed code. You'll just go ahead and paste that in into your I'll do it right here. So if I'm on YouTube and you go to the share and you want to do the embed, oops, sorry back. All right, it gives you this embed code here, which is an iframe, and you just copy that code and you go into your interpretive page and you would just paste that code in there. See how this is HTML. I've pasted it on its own line in my Markdown, and now that will be actually embedded in our page, and it's not hosted in our site, just like any other kind of embed. It's hosted on that other platform. And so you can do that with timeline.js that you've created in their platform as well. You can just paste that embed code in there and use it in that way. The nice part about having it self-contained within the repository is that then you're not relying on another outside source. You're not relying on Google Sheets API working, and that often breaks with timeline.js goes off every once in a while for a couple of days. So it's kind of nice if you want it, if you have that luxury of actually getting it sorted out to get it all into your collection. But it doesn't, as Olivia demonstrated, it doesn't have to be built into. So here it is. It's not styled correctly, but we would, we could spend a minute to get that styled correctly. But so this is not part of our repository. It's not an item in our collection. It's just an embed code that I pasted into my Markdown here. And so the same exact thing can be done with the timeline.js. You can set up, if you were in your timeline.js and you had a working example that you have your Google Sheet, you could download that as a CSV, put it into that data folder. And then you'd have to tweak the layout a little. Well, actually, you probably don't even have to tweak the layout, but you can put that in there, and then you'd be self-hosting it and using It might be totally unrelated to your collection, but as long as it was already working on Timeline.js, that means the objects are web accessible somewhere. It'll work in this repository as well. And then that data at least is in your repository, even if those objects aren't necessarily there. But you could also put all those objects in there in, say, the assets folder, in the image folder, or something like that, so that you could have it totally self-contained without having to get a offsite resources. So that is totally an option that would be available too.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Does that kind of answer?
I think it does. Yeah, thank you.
Not really built in an easy way, unfortunately, but I definitely see the need.
I think it actually, I think it would go, I think it works actually, but and if it's not, I can actually port it in there because there's another template that does it.
Yeah, Evan, what about the Timeline.js template?
Yeah, so the Timeline.js template is basically exactly the same concept. And so if you want to just host a whole bunch of Timeline.js's, you can literally download the exact template that you created there and as a CSV and paste it into that repository, and it'll self-host it in a self-contained manner. So the JSON that we have set up to run the self-contained Timeline.js in CollectionBuilder is kind of based on the CollectionBuilder template rather than the Timeline.js template. And so if you looked at the Timeline.js template, you could actually just pull that and put it into the repository or into your CollectionBuilder version, and then it would just work exactly with the base Timeline.js, if that makes sense. But if you want to do that, let me know and I can walk you through that, what it looks like.
Yeah, it's a little complex.
Yeah, I may go with the easiest. Thanks.
One other thing I wanted to show really quick that people had questions about, the narrow about page layout. If you want, the really quick way to get rid of that is just to change the layout into layout page. And then you have a full width page. So you can see I just changed the layout. Now it's full width page rather than that very narrow page. And so you don't have to write the CSS or anything to do that. And if you look in this layouts folder, these are the kind of default layouts that are available. And so there's a page narrow layout. So if you do that, it'll be just one more. Oh, it's still building, sorry. It'll be a little bit narrow, but not as narrow as the about page. There you go. Oh, actually it's as narrow as the about page, but it's not quite the same as the about page. There's the regular page layout, and then there's also the page full width, which gets you kind of no full bleed content going across the page.
And if you were going to create your own, if you were going to change the timeline, the kind of table-based timeline to a Timeline.js, you would want to change the layout of the timeline layout to full width page. And
then the one other thing that that Devin kind of mentioned, and I'm just going to show that one more time, with the there was an example of where there was a whole bunch of content on the home infographic, and we had a question about, how did you get that content in there? And so you can see that Devin did this. He put some content on the page, but it doesn't show up on the default home infographic. So if we go here, oh, we have this big timeline now. So if we want this content to show up, we go into that layout and we go into home infographic. And as Devin mentioned, there isn't the tag that says curly bracket content. And that's the thing that would actually pull the markdown content out of that stub and put it onto the page. So if we do want our content to show up, I'm gonna just add that right on top here. So I do curly bracket content, and then close curly brackets. And so that variable is whatever was in that markdown page is going to be rendered and then put in that location. So if we want to add a whole bunch of content, like writing an interpretive page in that index.md, and we want it to show up on the home page, then that's how you would add it. You would just make sure that you put this content tag somewhere where you want it to be displayed. So now we have the content right there at the top. Obviously in that example that I shared, they had kind of the base layout, and then at the bottom they put in, this long form content into the layout. So that would be the quick and an easy way to write the content in Markdown and then get it onto the homepage.
Hey, Evan, will you do one more thing? You show
Yeah.
one more thing. So if you look at the homepage, you can see how the timeline.js is sort of pushing against the row below it. So scroll down for a second.
Yep.
And so one great thing about Bootstrap is it once you learn how to kind of manipulate the pages, the margins and the padding, which is the base kind of way you adjust CSS options. So if Evan adds another class to that column, let's say MB-5, the MB stands for margin bottom. If it was MT, it's margin top. There's also MS start, which is on the left, and ME on the right. But now you can see you can get some spacing there just by using those really basic MB and et cetera. And so margin is on the outside, and if you wanted to like push on from the inside, that's padding. But the MB, just adding a little bit of that and learning a little bit of Bootstrap can really give you even more design features and ways to make sure that things lay out correctly. Because sometimes, like that was really bothering me. So I'm very happy that that's now fixed.
All right, and you can see, like, if you just you can just move your browser window to start seeing how these reflow, and you can see the nav eventually becomes a drop down. And the other thing, I guess, I'm going to reiterate again something that Devin showed with the browser tools that are built into your browser. So if you're on any page, it's super helpful to right click and do inspect, and that's going to open up your dev tools. And these are built into Firefox and Chrome, and they're very useful. And that's going to allow you to explore that the CSS that's, or the HTML that's on the page, and you can see what classes are applied to the various items out there. And it gives you a whole bunch of power to really understand exactly how things are displaying, and also start playing around with it and try out some different classes and stuff by editing it right here in this little dev tools. The other thing that had came up in a couple questions is, how do I know that the choices of colors that I'm choosing are going to be accessible? And so this is a really good place to start on that. You've opened your dev tools, and there's this tab that says Performance Insights. Wait, no, that's not what I want. Lighthouses, sorry. Lighthouse is where I want to be. And there's all these different categories of tests that they can run to tell you how your site is performing. And I'm just going to actually undo them except for accessibility. And then I'm going to press generate the report, and it's going to run through a whole bunch of accessibility tests and give me a report to tell me how we're doing, if it's looking all right or not. And then we can try to fix those issues. And so the number one problem that we're going to have is going to be the color contrasts in most cases. And so it's giving us a 99, which is really nice. That means it's passing all the automated tests. And the one problem that we have is it's saying the headings are not in order. And so, as I said, the headings and all the HTML is supposed to be semantic. And so ideally you have an H1, and then the next thing that it runs into is an H2, so that there's a hierarchy to your pages. In this case, we are using an H4, which is not your fault, and in here. And so it's going H1, H2, H4. And so that's not a serious issue. That's why they didn't mark us down very much. But it would be, the ideal thing would be that it would be, that next thing it would run into would be an H3. So we've skipped one level, but that's okay. But if you get an issue where our colors don't have enough contrast, that's the thing that will immediately show up in this Lighthouse test. And so you can just keep running it. I can close that and then run it again if I make another change to the colors, so that you can quickly assess if it's working for accessibility purposes. And so that's a really powerful set of tools. It's just built into your browser automatically. The easiest way to get to it, again, I think, is right-click inspect to open up those tools and start using it.
Great. We're running out of time, so who's going over the homework today? Is it Olivia, Evan?
I can do it.
Olivia.
Yeah, hold on.
Tomorrow show and tell.
Yep. Wait, you can see my screen, right? Am I good? Okay. So homework today is to finish up customizing. If you haven't finished going through the theme or the config CSVs, definitely do that. Customize the home page, move things around, just try to figure out how that Bootstrap grid system is working. And then we'd like you to look at your about page and try to add some content to it. We have some suggestions for things to add, like maybe 2 paragraphs of Markdown, maybe a list, add an include, whichever one, or multiple if you want to, and kind of just try to customize it a little bit, even if you don't have a lot of text about your collection yet. And then we put these optional activities in that are just a little bit more advanced. They require creating new pages. This drop-down one Evan already showed you, so that should be familiar. But one is to put the timeline on a new page, create a new timeline JS page, or create a new cloud page, which we haven't talked about. But all of the documentation for those are here. So should be pretty clear, but and again, those are optional, so if you don't have a chance, that's okay. But definitely keep emailing us if you run into trouble. And tomorrow we will be doing some show and tell. So we'd like to just hear about your collections and take a look at them. And even if they're not done yet, that's okay. I think we're all learning here. So but we have been excited by the subject matter that we've seen so far. So that should be fun. We'll also talk about how to do those final stages of building and deploying your site and the many different ways you can do that, and go over the different collection builder types too and what they can be used for. So that covers it, I think.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just cheering.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I just like, oh, hand. Great. Well, are you all feeling like you're ready to show off what you've done? Or are you sort of terrified that people are going to look at it? We don't have a ton of time for everybody, so it'll be a little fast, but it's exciting to see what people do, and probably aim for like a little overview of a couple, 2 minutes or so, and click through, and we'll just kind of have a lot of shared screens.
And if you wanted to go into your issues tab that you started to share your, you could add another comment about things that you found and things you want to share, or your reflections and experience. And then we can kind of use that as a place to go and see everybody's collections.
Okay.
And we'll still be on, or Devin will be on office hours today from 2 to 3 Pacific time. So.
Cool. Okay,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.
See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.